Welcome to the Azure Bootcamp. This week, we're talking about Azure subscription governance. What is Azure governance? Governance is a huge topic. What's specific to this session here? We're talking about Azure subscriptions and governance around subscriptions. How you manage your tenant and your resources. What type of policies and procedures you have around provisioning and managing those resources. What are you doing for security and what are you doing for monitoring? With governance, there's questions you want to ask your teams in your business. What are you doing about data requirements and sovereignty and privacy and those types of things? What do you do if somebody inadvertently makes a change in the cloud or critical system? How are you preventing that? How are you monitoring that? And how do you know what resources are out there and how they're being used? This is a classic asset management problem that is not necessarily addressed that well in the cloud. We do this through governance. Some key information around governance. And these are quite, shocking figures here that literally 44% of companies cannot keep track of their cloud infrastructure. You have product teams and developers and everybody across the cloud provisioning your resources with the click of a mouse. And they don't know what's out there or what's happening. This can get expensive and expose risk. 17% don't validate compliance, if you have any sort of requirements, whether it's around PCI, GDPR, any sort of NIST standards you have to hold to, how are these resources being provisioned to be in accordance with that? And also your internal security policies. More than a quarter of IT professionals aren't confident their cloud environment secure, which is a very important metric because there's some very critical and sensitive information in the cloud right now. And I think probably the most important metric here is 60% rely on manual remediation or monitoring of policies, which, if anything, managing policies in the cloud is easier than on-prem, but with the cloud, this is getting a little bit more difficult because of the lack of simple governance. Someone made it the correlation between the early days of SharePoint and the cloud now. And this is where people were using the power of SharePoint, but just making a huge mess at the same time because there was no governance or taxonomy or way to provision sites or information. You ended up with this platform that didn't work for you anymore, got costly, or was too unwieldy. Same problem with the cloud. We have people creating VMs, subscriptions, resources, without any sort of governance or foresight. And it's ending up with this unwieldy kind of situation. Key elements to Azure governance, using the Azure Enterprise Scaffold. This is a set of tools and questions and templates that try to help establish your governance. A quick Google search, you'll be able to find that. We'll go into that here in just a little bit, but use this tool that Microsoft has provided to establish your governance. It'll get you there a lot quicker with a lot less pain, less questions throughout the process. Look at the kind of the patterns and practices behind, Azure subscription governance and resources. Those have been identified very well. I think a key thing, and it's quite simple, is just even like how you name your resources. It makes them easier to find, right? Use the resource manager and the policies within there. We have kind of the Azure visibility that changes into Azure. Use those logs to understand what's going on. Use the tools you can lay on top of them to govern changes and changes to your cloud environment. You can use tagging, and this really helps with asset management. Look at that. Can restrict access to certain subscriptions and resources, using your identity system. Should developers really be allowed to provision items inside of your production tenant or subscription? No. Should, IT ops be messing around with your development environment where they're testing and experimenting? Probably won't work that well. So use those roles accordingly and make sure that's documented so people understand what's going on. Azure Security Center has ability to kind of look at those audit trails, be able to have advanced threat analytics and those types of things for changes or adjustments inside of your cloud. Take a look on how you can use that, to harden your security posture around governance and enforce policy. So kind of like when defining your governance, here's how perhaps one like high level subscription hierarchy from a governance standpoint will look like. You will have sort of, your identity, right? Your identity system, ultra secure, only has specific people have access to or make changes. And you'll have a set of rules and policies around that. And then you'll have something that's, a little, QA and dev, perhaps for product development. What resources are allowed to be deployed there? Who can stand those up from a dev and test standpoint? And then your production will look a little bit different. Probably a different set of actors, probably a different set of resources, to make sure your application runs correctly. Document what's available and upfront and set those policies to ensure governance and reliability across your cloud platform. Okay, so this is the Azure Scaffold kind of high-level overview of what's available to kind of establish your governance. It takes you through sort of, what are you going to do from a licensing and subscription standpoint? What are your policies and how are you going to name things? But specifically, how do you tag resources? How are resources grouped together? We kind of went back into sort of those dev and test environments. What are your roles and rights? How does that map back to your existing Active Directory and identity management? How are you using automation? Automation is a key component because it allows people to create resources that are in accordance with your governance policy and doesn't, leave room for human error when deploying these things. What are you going to lock? You're going to lock some of your production environments. You're probably going to lock your vault or anywhere you're keeping secrets, those types of things. So, inadvertent from automation or humans can't adjust those resources. And really kind of taking through this Azure Scaffold process will help your organization with your governance policy. All right, things we've learned. We've been helping out some organization with governance, whether it's a new kind of net new cloud sort of initiative, or helping kind of come back behind and clean up existing things. You want a dedicated team, across everybody. This shouldn't be specific to IT ops. Development needs to be involved. Business needs to be involved. Make sure automating your provisioning and deployment of these resources. That makes sure that, I think we said this before, but that makes sure everything's happening correctly. And if it's not, it's within your tooling, not within a human, which is a lot easier to fix. Operational maturity matters. I think establishing governance right now automatically increases your operational maturity, and it's going to have a lot more visibility and clarity in your system. Look at your cloud monitoring tools. Make sure they're made for the cloud. Azure Security Center, Operation Management Suite, those types of things are made for the cloud. Some of these other ones that we're used to and comfortable with aren't necessarily ready for cloud and ready to monitor and report on cloud governance. So evaluate your monitoring information. And a key component of Azure governance or governance in general is change control. So if you want to make changes to your governance policy, which you will as you evolve and as you learn more, have a change control process in place. Make sure that's well documented and you're able to cascade to your automated scripts, your documentation, and your teams.